There's no shortage of mysteries out there, and I've talked about some of the lesser known ones, but in this video we'll take a look at some of the more well-known mysteries that still leaves us asking questions. Directly following the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, FBI and CIA investigators began questioning and taking statements from the spectators who were present on the afternoon of November 22, 1963. Those who were filming or photographing the day, especially when shots were fired, had pictures and film taken by the investigators. These statements, pictures and films would then be pieced together to determine exactly what happened. The photos and films were not necessarily of the best quality, but nevertheless they provided evidence that has since been examined over and over. In the panic following the shooting, bystanders fled for cover. It was not immediately clear which direction the shots came from, and people ran in every direction, running into each other and fleeing towards whatever safe places they could find. The evidence the investigators collected was conflicting. Hundreds of witnesses recalled different events and statements changed, so the pictures and films became more important. Clearly shown in several photographs is a woman with what appears to be a camera of some kind in front of her face, pointing directly at the president's motorcade when the shots were fired. She is located close to the street and had an extremely good vantage point for capturing the events surrounding the shooting. She is wearing a scarf of a tan or light brown colour. The headscarf earned her the nickname of the Babushka Lady, a reference to a similar Russian scarf. She appears in several other photographs but never clearly enough to make some kind of identification. The investigating officials were intrigued. The woman was so close to the shooting, and the photographic evidence shows that instead of running away after the shots were fired as many people did, the Babushka Lady continued filming. A further call went out from the FBI to everyone who had been in the vicinity of the assassination. The Babushka Lady never came forward, despite evidence showing that she was capturing the tragedy in some way from a relatively good position. Interestingly, a Dallas film developer later told FBI agents that he had developed a single-colour slide brought in by an unknown woman. The slide was somewhat blurry, but from the developer's description it matched up as being taken from the spot the Babushka Lady was standing or very close to it. In 1970, Beverly Oliver claimed to be the Babushka Lady, and that her camera had been confiscated by the FBI on the day of the assassination and never returned. At first this seemed to be the solution to the mystery, until Oliver identified the camera she had used, which was a model that had not been in production until several years after the assassination. Witnesses who had been standing near the Babushka Lady stated Oliver was not nearby. Additionally, analysis of the photos that include the Babushka Lady seemed to indicate a woman much older and heavier than Oliver, who was 17 and slim in 1963. The Babushka Lady and her film vanished from history. These mysterious footprints, which appeared overnight in heavy snowfall in southern Devon in 1855, have never been adequately explained. According to contemporary reports, they stretched for over 100 miles, and went through solid walls and haystacks, appearing on the other side as though there was no barrier. The extent of the footprints may have been exaggerated at the time, and they may have been the result of a freak atmospheric conditions, but in truth the footprints still remain a complete mystery. On the night of the 8th and 9th of February 1855, after a heavy snowfall, a series of hoof-like marks appeared in the snow. These footprints, most of which measured around 4 inches long, 3 inches across, between 8 and 16 inches apart and mostly in a single file, were reported from over 30 locations across Devon and a couple in Dorset. It was estimated that the total distance of the tracks amounted to between 40 and 110 miles. Houses, rivers, haystacks and other obstacles were travelled straight over, and footprints appeared on the tops of snow-covered roofs and high walls which lay in the footprints' path, as well as leading up to and exiting various drain pipes as small as 4 inches in diameter. The papers picked up that some kangaroos had escaped from a private zoo, but the track's description bears no resemblance to the tracks a kangaroo would leave. The devil's footprints remain an intriguing mystery that will only truly be solved if the phenomenon happens again and can be examined more closely. In July of 1518, in full view of her neighbours, Frau Troffea began to violently dance in the streets of the city of Strasbourg, France. There was no music and her face betrayed no expression of joy. She appeared unable to stop herself from her frenzy. Had this remained an isolated incident, the city elders may have put it down to madness or demonic possession, but soon after she began dancing, a neighbour joined in, and then another. By the end of the week, more than 30 people were dancing night and day on the streets of the city, and it didn't stop there. By the time a month had passed, at least 400 citizens were swept up in the phenomenon. Medical and civic authorities were called in once some of the dancers began dying from heart attacks, exhaustion, or strokes. For some inexplicable reason, these men believed that the cure for the dancing was more dancing, so they erected a wooden stage for the dancers and musicians were called in. One theory to explain this includes food poisoning caused by the toxic and psychoactive chemical products of ergot fungi, which grows commonly on grains in the wheat family. Eating the infected rye can lead to seizures, although the movements of those affected look much more like traditional dancing than seizures of any sort. None of the theories put forward completely explain the 1518 dancing. On the afternoon of November 24, 1971, a man identifying himself as Dan Cooper purchased a one-way ticket from Portland, Oregon to Seattle, Washington. He boarded Northwest Airlines Flight 305, a Boeing 727, carrying a briefcase and wearing a suit with a black overcoat. Cooper took a seat near the rear of the plane. Once in flight, he lit a cigarette and ordered a drink from the flight attendant. After receiving and paying for his drink, Cooper passed a note to the flight attendant which stated that he had a bomb. The note went on to say that he wanted $200,000 in $20 bills and 4 parachutes, 2 primary and 2 reserve. The mystery man remained calm and friendly to the flight attendants. Once on the ground in Seattle, the FBI provided the ransom money after thoroughly documenting and photographing the bills. The parachutes were provided to the hijacker and the plane was refueled. Upon receiving all of his ransom demands, Cooper released all of the passengers and flight attendants. All who remained on the plane were the pilot, co-pilot, the flight engineer and 1 flight attendant. He then instructed the pilots to fly towards Mexico City at 200 miles per hour at an altitude of 10,000 feet. The hijacked airliner took off from Seattle at 7:40 p.m, with the flight crew under instructions to stay in the cockpit. Shortly after takeoff, flight attendant Mucklow observed the hijacker tying something to his body. At 8 p.m, the rear staircase indicator light came on in the cockpit as the rear staircase of the craft was being lowered manually from inside the aircraft. At 8:13 p.m, with the parachutes and 21 pounds of ransom money in hand, Dan Cooper jumped from the plane. In the days following the hijacking, the FBI began to investigate the crime. A search of the plane yielded very few clues, but it was discovered that before jumping from the aircraft, Cooper had removed his tie. Many witnesses were questioned, and on a hunch, detectives questioned a Portland, Oregon man named D.B. Cooper, but nothing ever came of it. With help from the US Air Force, the FBI recreated the jump and placed his landing in the area around Lake Merwin, Washington. The FBI, with help from state and local law enforcement, the US Air Force and the National Guard began to comb the woods in the area of the supposed landing site of Dan Cooper. The searches, eyewitness questioning, suspect list and a trace of the numbered bills used to pay the ransom failed to yield any leads at all. To this day, the hijacking of Flight 305 by Dan Cooper remains an open case. In 1978, deer hunters near Castle Rock, Washington discovered the information card for the rear staircase of Flight 305. Castle Rock is located north of Lake Merwin. In 1980, $5,800 of the ransom money was found buried on a sandy shore of the Columbia River near Vancouver, over 20 miles from Lake Merwin. The money was deteriorated and waterlogged but was still bundled in the original packing. Over $194,000 from the ransom have never been recovered. In 2008, a piece of parachute was found near Amboy, Washington. It's believed to be one of the 2 parachutes that Dan Cooper used in his escape from the hijacked aeroplane. These items, the money, card and parachute, are the only evidence that have ever been located in connection with the crime. The FBI officially suspended active investigation of the case in July 2016, but continues to request that any physical evidence that might emerge related to the parachutes or ransom money be submitted for analysis. The self-proclaimed Zodiac killer was directly linked to at least 5 murders in Northern California in 1968 and 1969, and may have been responsible for more. After he taunted police and made threats through letters sent to the area's newspapers from 1969 to 1974, further communication from him abruptly stopped. Despite an intense search for the killer and the investigation into numerous suspects, no one was ever arrested for the crimes and the case remains open. At present, 4 separate attacks have been definitely attributed to the Zodiac killer. The first confirmed incident took place on the night of December the 20th, 1968. When 17-year-old David Faraday and his 16-year-old girlfriend Betty Jensen were shot to death near their car at a remote spot on Lake Herman Road on the outskirts of California. Police were left baffled, unable to determine the motive for the crime or a suspect. On the early morning of July 5, 1969, Darlene Ferrin and her boyfriend were sitting in a parked car when they were approached by a man with a flashlight who fired multiple shots at them, killing Ferrin and seriously wounding her boyfriend. Within an hour of the incident, a man called the police department, giving them the location of the crime scene, and claiming responsibility for both the attack and the murders of Faraday and Jensen. Despite this confession, little progress was made in the case. Suspects have been named by law enforcement and amateur investigators, but no conclusive evidence has surfaced. The California Department of Justice has maintained an open case file on the Zodiac murders since 1969. So that was 5 unsolved mysteries. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more countdown videos.